Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Today is January 13th, 2023, and thank you for joining us for this first edition of Research Live in the new year. My name is Mike Terrazas. I'm the Director of Research Communications in the Office of Research here at UGA, and today we're going to kick off a 5-part Research Live series called How Not to Research Alone, creating meaningful relationships with funders. And as the title for this first event in the series says, it is all about relationships. So Research Live webinars are intended to provide UGA investigators with timely, practical information to support your work, and we're going to do our best to meet that goal today. Before we get started, though, let me just mention a couple of housekeeping points. When we take questions following the presentation, you can ask your question through the Q&A or through the raise hand function. You should see both of those options along the bottom of your Zoom window. If you raise your hand, I'm going to assume that you want to ask your question by voice. So I'll call on you by name and I'll enable your microphone while you ask your question. We'd love to hear any feedback you have about today's session, including suggestions for future topics. The Research Live page on the Office of Research website has a suggestion form that you can access through a red button at the top of the page, and we encourage you to make use of it. I'll drop the URL for that page into the chat window here in just a second. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let me introduce our speakers today. We've got Larry Hornak, Associate Vice President for Integrative Team Initiatives in the Office of Research, Marty Bink, Director of Defense and Security Collaborations in the Office of Research, Jake Moss, Director of Proposal Enhancement in the Office of Research, Richard Potter, Director of Business Engagement and Collaboration in the Office of Business Engagement, and Matt Pruitt, Director of Foundation Relations in Development and Alumni Relations. So Larry, it's all yours.
All right, thanks very much, Mike. And everybody, welcome. We hope this will be a helpful session for you as we proceed. So I think Mike has already mentioned the individuals here. And let me just mention that these are all individuals who are on campus who are really here to serve the faculty and support you. And so what we're going to be sharing with you today about not researching alone is really a compilation of our own experience, but also more importantly, the experience of faculty. So this workshop kickoff series is really a reflection of really faculty, a diverse set of faculty across the campus who have had success not only in building their own teams. As a matter of fact, the faculty I'm showing here are actually participants in our team leadership workshops, which we've been holding the last few years. So they've been successful and growing in their ability to really grow large teams of faculty, but then also they've been pretty successful at reaching out to their funders and being able to develop relationships there. And as Mike mentioned, this series is really all about relationships. And what we're doing with this very first kickoff one is really kind of trying to distill from the experience of faculty, from our own experience, what some of those key underlying elements are that are going to be essential. And you'll see recurring, but in a little different context each time as we talk about through the 4 subsequent workshops, the different funding agencies and funding sources. So let's start out by just looking at what are really the important characteristics of every successful relationship, and now any kind of relationship. And I think you'll see some common elements there as we go through. But let's bring that down to the funders, right? So no matter the funder, the ideal relationship with them is, first off, we want to have a long-term one. But the way we do that is by grounding it really in shared value and trust. And so fundamentally, that's our key element. So let's kind of look at those two things, both this notion of shared value and trust. So what do I mean by shared value? Well, again, from the standpoint of, well, frankly, any relationship, but specifically with a funder, it's really those outcomes of the relationship that really both you and your funder value. And often that value can come from very different reasons. So for example, right, you have your research and scholarship that you're doing to really contribute to your community, to contribute to your technical or or disciplinary community, your students, right, who you take pride in growing and educating and putting out into the world, right, in growing in that community. And of course, the impact, right? Well, when you look at your funder has very similar interests, right? But what they value may intersect completely with those things that you value, but they also may, again, likely come from other aspects. So your students, for example, the workforce that they represent to those funders, the impact can be, can arrive from the research, but also can really look at and impact some things which, again, affect maybe the bottom line of that organization, maybe affect, if it's a nonprofit, the actual impact that they're trying to have, and so on. So you're really looking for that intersection. So establishing that shared value really creates a true partnership. Why? Because then, both you and your funder are really very interested in achieving the same outcomes, no matter, what value you're deriving from it. And again, those values might be somewhat, different, but you're looking for that intersection of values. So how do you achieve that? Well, knowing what your funding partner truly values. And again, you can put any partner in there, right? And I think we probably all experience perhaps that guessing at what your partner values is a risky proposition, right? You really don't want to guess at that. You want to know it. And, again, if you're not going to know it, then you're probably talking about a short-term relationship, if any relationship at all. So really finding out, spending the time to find out what your funding partner values is critical. And also, I inserted here, knowing that it's not static. What your partner could be valuing this year may change next year, okay? So what are their needs? What motivates them? What's their reward system? What are they trying to achieve? And again, so what are their vision and goals? So really, another way you can look at this, for those of you familiar with kind of more the innovation sphere, this is really kind of old-fashioned customer discovery, right? They're in many ways your customer for what you're doing. And you really want to discover, you want to have empathy, frankly, for what they're seeking to achieve, what their goals are, what, again, what is going to satisfy their needs as well. The other element we talked about is trust. And this, we're all familiar with this. And I've just taken some quotes, probably many of which we've used before, but really trust, as we know, is clearly the foundation of all long-term relationships. So what about this context? What do we mean by trust here? Well, that second bullet really addresses it. It's really about establishing and maintaining through consistent delivery of value to your funding partner. So you want to deliver that value, that component of that shared value that we we're just talking about, to your funding partner in a consistent way. And then what's the reciprocal side of this relationship? Well, they keep providing you funding, hopefully on a long-term basis, and that tracks in time with what everybody's values are as they change over time, right? So keeping that communication open so that you can get that tracking of known shared values and that intersection of values in place, and you can consistently deliver on it. These, independent of the areas that we're going to be talking about through these workshops, these are all very, very, consistent items that are going to appear across all of the workshops. So kind of bottom line is really that, fostering a long-term trusted relationship grounded in shared value is going to require a different, thoughtful approach to each funder type and individual. So it's very similar to personal relationships, right? These are personal relationships ultimately with your funder, right? And again, what's going to impact them here is the organization that they're representing, the values, the reward system that individual works in are going to be different, and the culture is going to be different. So the way you approach that relationship is going to be different. So it's going to come down to really, it's all about relationships, but then also adjusting, tailoring your relationship appropriately to the organization and the individual. So the workshops that we've got set up are across 4 different sectors: industry, federal funding, foundation funding, and mission agency funding. And again, Richard, Jake, Matt, and Marty are going to now give you a kind of a synopsis of what kind of things they're going to be addressing in the workshops that are coming. But you'll see that a lot of these fundamental points that we're just talking about really permeate, but now really addressing these particular sectors. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Richard to talk about industry. You're muted, Richard.
You'd think after almost 3 years, I'd know that, but at any rate, thank you. Thanks, Larry. If you would advance to the next slide, please. And good morning, everyone. The Office of Business Engagement at University of Georgia was established about 1.5 years ago with the mission that you see here on the screen. And we act on our mission by facilitating relationships and projects that promise mutual benefit for both the university and our industry partners. Next slide, please. Our charge is to increase the number of companies engaged with the university, as well as increase the depth of those relationships, moving from one-off transactional projects and toward more holistic partnerships where we're working together, the university and the industry partner, to achieve mutual goals. Next slide. Today, I want to focus the remainder of my time on what you can expect to take away from our session in 2 weeks on January 27. These next slides are intentionally text heavy so that you can refer back to them. We will send out these slides following the Zoom meeting so that you can refer back and decide for yourself if this is going to be worth your while. And I do want to emphasize, well, the first takeaway here is why should you consider seeking corporate funding for your research? And I want to emphasize here that if you're in the arts and humanities or in the so-called soft sciences, this may be relevant to you. Don't immediately write it off. Companies are moving toward a skill-based hiring as opposed to a discipline-based hiring. And they're asking, how do we identify people with skills like empathy, communications, critical thinking? And these skills are closely correlated with psychology, sociology, anthropology, English, history, philosophy. I could even make an argument for religion. So again, if you're in the arts and humanities, in the soft sciences, don't hesitate to attend this session in 2 weeks. I think you may find it of value. Next slide, please. So you can expect to learn what makes a corporate sponsored project different from a federally funded project or private foundation funded project, and why it's important to understand the motivations of the company and your primary contact at that company, as well as how the company and your point of contact define success in their world. And next slide, please. So corporate sponsored research projects may not be the first interaction between a company and the University of Georgia. Companies have multiple touch points where they can and want to interact with the university. And these other touch points can sometimes lead to sponsored research projects. The more touch points a company has with the university, the deeper that relationship is, and the greater the value of the relationship is to that company. And it's more likely then to become a long-term partnership. Next slide, please. Many faculty I've spoken to are just wondering where to start when it comes to corporate sponsored research. So we'll explore some ways to leverage your current network to get a foot in the door, and also how to tap into other networks to promote yourself, your research, increase your visibility in the corporate world. Next slide. Your research may be very cutting edge, but if you can't frame it as a solution to a company's problem, it's most likely going to fall on deaf ears. And so we can help you to frame your expertise and your research so that it's more appealing to a potential corporate sponsor. Next slide. We'll provide some insights into where to go and who to contact to find companies that are aligned with your research and expertise. And next slide. And then we can help you find the right person, the decision makers. We can help you identify University of Georgia alumni who may be employees for that company. We can also, and I will, during our session, I'll provide a demonstration on how to use LinkedIn to identify corporate contacts who have influence and authority related to research and research funding at the company that you're looking at. Next slide. The truth is, long-term strategic industry partnerships can take a lot of time and a lot of energy to develop. And there's often a little bit of luck involved as well, being in the right place at the right time. But there are things that you can do to stack the odds in your favor. And I look forward to sharing more details on that with you on the 27th. Thanks, Larry.
Great, thanks, Richard. Next, for the February 3rd workshop, Jake is going to give us an overview.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Moss. I direct the Office for Proposal Enhancement. And just to introduce our office to those of you who aren't familiar with it, we are the Research Development / Proposal Development Office at UGA. Our primary mission is to get more large, complex projects funded at UGA. And what we mean by large and complex is not necessarily tied to a dollar amount. It might be several $1 million or more for the hard sciences, but we consider pretty much anything that is an arts or humanities project to be a big dollar value because those opportunities are so rare. So we help anyone all over campus with their research or scholarship proposals. And we are a little bit limited because we have a small staff. But if you are applying for funding, you can feel free to contact us and we will try to help you in whatever way we can. Next slide. So my February 3rd session is going to be looking at a structured approach to developing proposals that will take a lot of the angst and terror out of the proposal process, ideally. The key is to start early, and I'll be saying that again and again. But looking at it through the lens of relationships is interesting, because what I'm talking about is generally competitive grants with federal funders like NSF and NIH, but also the National Endowment for Humanities, National Endowment for Arts, USDA. We help people with all of those federal opportunities and other types of opportunities as well. But in terms of these steps, just going through them real quick. So finding the right opportunities, both in terms of how to search for funding that's appropriate for the research you want to do, but then also making sure that that opportunity is really a fit for your research. That's a key. We'll talk about that on the next slide. Researching the program, making a detailed plan. We have tools that can help you do that, making a timeline and checklist for all of the proposal parts that stagger deadlines for yourself so that it keeps you on task, but also is not overwhelming in any particular week. So you're not writing that proposal, doing all-nighters on the weekend before it's due. Nobody's family appreciates that. And it's not good for your physical or mental health either. So we're going to try to help you figure out ways to avoid that. Taking advantage of grant expertise at all different levels, figuring out how to engage the readers, engage independent readers of your proposal, because a drafting process where you get feedback from lots of different people is really important, but you've got to set that up well in advance of the deadline so that you're not making too many demands of your colleagues. Writing, obviously, I'm writing to an audience, and we'll talk about that. And then, of course, revising based on those comments, submitting, and then resubmitting, because in general, the grant success rates are low. You have to expect that this is an iterative process where you continually improve your proposal and resubmit, and that's just part of it. And we can offer you a lot of strategies and support for doing that as well. Next slide. So I made this Venn diagram, which is applicable at a couple different points, key at a couple different points. First of all, you don't want to be spending time on a proposal that is not going to be worth it, because it's in a time intensive and labor intensive and mental health intensive process. It's not at the top of everybody's lists of things to do. So really doing your research to figure out whether a project is a fit for you. And what this simple diagram shows is you have a research agenda, your sponsor has a mission, and in many cases, there will be a solicitation that has a lot of information packed into it about what they're looking for. So really doing a thorough analysis of, do I want to apply to this opportunity? How much am I going to have to bend my research and what I want to do in order to make this a viable proposal for this RFP or this solicitation? And is that worth it? If it is worth it, then this is still relevant because what you're trying to do is convince your reviewers that your project is, I said, a perfect fit here, but that you have enough shared goals so that you can pitch your proposal so that it's doing both what you want to do with your research and it's going to get funded by the sponsor and they'll be excited about it. Next slide. So when I was thinking about relationships in this context, obviously the major explicit relationship with the funding agency is going to be with the program staff or program officer. And those are things that develop over time, but also with a lot of agencies, that's a rotating cast of characters. So the relationships become a little bit more abstract. This is me sort of brainstorming, and we'll talk about all of this in the longer session about how to exploit or utilize these relationships. But obviously the explicit relationships are with your colleagues and your senior colleagues, your peers, and junior colleagues can all be different sources of support and information when you're developing proposals. Again, the key is to build those relationships and contact people early and in the right way so that they're willing to help you. And there's also going to be a quid pro quo involved in that. And we'll talk about in the longer session, we'll talk about how to navigate that. Lay readers are often underutilized, and I'm talking about spouses, children, parents, friends who are not even scientists or specialists in your area. You can get a lot of insight, especially about the innovation and significance and key points of your proposal if you're able to describe your research to someone who's not familiar with the subject matter. You have a lot of resources. It's important to develop those relationships with your research development office, which is to say me and my staff, and with the Sponsored Projects Administration, because they're a tremendous source of knowledge in terms of the grant world. And then finally, of course, program officers and agency personnel, and we'll talk in the longer session about how to build relationships with your program officer, even if those relationships are relatively ephemeral. If the program officer moves on, or if they're really sort of oriented around one solicitation, we'll talk about when to contact them, what sort of questions to ask, and how those interactions are best accomplished. Implicit relationships, this is where it gets interesting to me. So there are two major texts. I'm an English, I was an English master's degree recipient. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about texts. There are two major texts in a proposal, in a competitive proposal to a federal funding agency. There is the solicitation, and that can be as simple as say an NIH standard R01 or R21 solicitation that's fairly generic, or as specific as an NSF Engineering Research Center solicitation that has just a ton of instruction stuff crammed into it. So we will talk about how to interpret those texts in terms of they tend to be these complex, messy, multiply authored documents that are often self-contradictory. So you kind of have to reconstruct what the intent of the solicitation is and navigate between its different components and figure out what your best strategy is for what to emphasize, what to de-emphasize. The other text, of course, is your proposal itself. So you need to do as much research as you can to figure out what the makeup of the audience is. I have written, I've helped write proposals that have had extremely heterogeneous audiences that include scientists, but also just bankers who happen to be board members for a foundation, for example. And I'm impinging a little on Matt's territory, but we cover some of the same ground. But figuring out how to write one document that has what the different reviewers who come from different backgrounds are going to be looking for is a tricky challenge, but one that we can help you navigate. So, and then the important thing, this goes back to the Venn diagram, is how can you write to your audience to address the sponsor's mission and the solicitation requirements without compromising your research agenda, without deforming what you want to do. Because one of the worst things you can do is write a proposal you don't really want to carry out, get it funded, and then find yourself spending 3 to 5 years doing a project that might have really onerous reporting requirements and weekly Zoom meetings that are 2 or 3 hours long. And it's not really what you want to be doing with your research. So that's, again, that takes place when you're deciding what to apply for, very important. But then also, once you decide that you do want to go for something, how do you write a proposal that's what you want to do, but that simultaneously fulfills the requirements of the sponsor? So those are the topics. I think that's all of my slides. There's another one I will have ambushed myself. But those are the topics we'll cover on February 3rd.
All right, great. Thanks very much, Jake. And now Matt's going to tell us about his February 17th workshop.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Pruitt. I'm the Director of Foundation Relations here at the university. And so my office is housed in development, the euphemism we use for fundraising at our university. I'm part of the fundraising arm. So distinct from the research enterprise, although I do work with our friends and colleagues in sponsored projects pretty frequently. I'm just going to try to give you a little bit of an overview about what foundations are looking for and some context on foundations to give you enough information to decide if you want to come back on February 17th, and I hope you will. Larry, if you could advance. So a little bit of context I think will be useful is that the saying I heard when I first got into this work several years ago was that if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. They're all a little different. They're going to vary widely in their size, their mission, their operating procedures. As you see here, some are highly localized geographically. They care about one city or one state. Some operate on a regional or national scale. They'll take submissions and look for opportunities much more broadly. Some have a large professional staff and structured procedures for how to approach them. Some are what we call family foundations, or they operate much less formally and are kind of more relationship driven. Some have 2-stage applications with an LOI or a concept paper. Some give you one chance a year to go all in and push all your chips in and see if you can get a grant. And so I say that to know that part of engaging foundations is kind of knowing what kind of foundation you're working with and dealing with. And if you're going to build a relationship with one, you kind of have to have an idea of which type of foundation you're working for. So all that having been said, I'll make a few generalizations about foundations. And I wanted to preface it with the first slide just to say, if you look at this slide and you say, well, none of this applies to my work, don't get scared off, because the good thing about there being so many different types of foundations is that there's probably a funder for everybody just about. Okay, don't mean to overpromise there, but there's a lot of variety out there in the foundation world. So one thing I would say broadly is that foundations are looking for some direct impact. Again, another quote I heard when I got into this work was, all foundations want to save lives or change lives, right? That may be a little painting with a little bit of a broad brush. Some do fund basic research and more incremental research. But regardless of those big goals, they definitely still tend to work incrementally. So where Jake just mentioned the 3-year or 4-year or 5-year, kind of grant period, most of the foundations I work with are looking for some sort of short-term, being a year, maybe 2 years. And they want to see what you can do with those funds in 2 years. So that doesn't mean you're going to change the world or change this population or fix this issue in that time period. They want to see how you can move the needle a little bit, right? They're going to typically have a fairly narrow mission or focus area. Sometimes a couple different ones. They have an environmental bucket, a health bucket, education bucket. And to echo something that I've heard from other speakers today, getting funding depends on helping them achieve that mission and focus. That's the lens we have to look at it through. Not you should fund us because we're doing great work and we're awesome, but you should fund us because we're well aligned with your mission and we can help you do what you want to do. I would note in the foundation world that, especially in the past few years, equity is an increasingly common concern in the grant making decisions. How can you show equity in the on your side of the equation, your personnel, but also in the work you're doing? And I would add, last but not least, for this slide, that the dollar amounts vary greatly, but I would say they're typically smaller than what the federal agencies are going to offer, right? So whereas you might be looking at a 1.5 million grant from NIH, I mean, we rarely get into seven figures in my world, just here and there, but we do get into $500,000, $250,000, six figures, so forth and so on, right? Yeah, and so a couple things they like to see. And again, these are generalizations that they may not apply to every foundation out there, and there's a lot of them. Collaboration, cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary efforts, even multi-organizational efforts. It seems increasingly rare that they're really interested in funding one PI and one lab doing isolated work. Okay, not to say they aren't sometimes, especially if you're doing exceptional work or groundbreaking work, but collaboration and multidisciplinary efforts seem to be more and more common. Typically want to see multiple funders. Most of them don't like to be the sole funder. Some of them don't like to be the majority funder. So that means foundation funding can be a good complement to other funding that you have or a supplement to some ongoing work that you're doing. And last but not least, the tough part, I think, is they're looking for work that's in the sweet spot. They want enough evidence that it can work, enough reason to believe this is going to be successful, but that you're still not far enough along to where you don't need their funding anymore, right? They want to be able to know that their money is going to make a difference and have an impact in advancing the cause. Okay. Next one, please. And so how do I pursue foundation funding? We'll cover this more on February 17th, but the short answer is work with me in my office. We're a small office. There's me, and when we're fully staffed, 2 other people. Right now, it's just me and 1 other person. We have an open spot like so many others do. But we can provide guidance and consultation, help you identify funders, provide support, and really do a lot of the heavy lifting and the work that probably you don't have the time to do or don't want to do. So I realize this is embarrassing. I've gotten the phone numbers mixed up, but the email addresses are right for me and Colleen. And so if you're interested before February 17th in touching base, please do. And otherwise, I hope to see you, a lot of you back here then and get a little deeper into pursuing foundation funding.
Great. Thanks very much, Matt. And that brings us to Marty, who's going to talk about mission agencies for his and what's coming up for the March 3rd workshop.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And just to summarize my presentation for today, it's everything everyone else just said, right? So, as Larry started off the session today, saying there are these themes that kind of go across the different types of funding sources that we're looking at and different types of engagements. Echoing, the idea of shared value and teaming, mission agencies require us to give a sort of a specific definition. So what is it that working with mission agencies is different from working with other federal agencies, industry, or even foundations? So even though the principles of engagement may be similar, there are some specific problem space for mission agencies. So first of all, we need to describe or define what we mean by mission agencies. And this is we use mission agencies here internally at UGA as an umbrella, but really it's driving a very specific type of funders. So the way that we can best differentiate federal mission agencies from other federal agencies like NIH, NSF, is that they're federal agencies that are responsible for delivering solutions to the government or to the citizens of the United States. So it's more of a definition, excuse me, what mission agencies are not rather than what they are. So these are not, excuse me, agencies that are funding research for public purpose. So even though NSF has missions and they have a mission, NIH has missions and a mission, most of the funding that comes through NIH and SF are what in sort of fiscal speak, public purpose research. That is not the case for mission agencies. So generally, when we define a mission agency, it's anything that starts with U.S. Department of. So Department of Agriculture is a mission-based agency, defense, education, homeland security, energy, commerce, so on and so forth. Now, again, within each of these different agencies, some have more or less science and technology or research funding available to them. And the research mission within each of these federal agencies varies. So the one emphasis that UGA has put in the mission agency space since I got here and more recently is looking at those mission agencies that serve defense and national security interests. So as some of you may know, the university recently set up or established this University of Georgia Research Institute with the mission to sort of service these mission agencies. And Larry Hornak is one of the interim co-directors of that, as well as Gene Rhodes. So the UGARI is looking specifically at Department of Energy interactions, and then also encompasses my office for defense and security collaboration. So what I'm going to talk about specifically are those mission agencies around, again, defense and national security, but realizing that a lot of what I say does apply to the other mission-based federal agencies. And if you have a specific interest in one of these other mission-based agencies, there's probably someone on campus that can help you get in touch with those agencies more specifically. But again, the emphasis on national security requires that, you know, my office takes a particular approach. So next slide. So why might you want to engage with one of these national security mission agencies? Well, mostly it's because they have a large and complex research enterprise, a wide variety of technologies and science areas that are being funded. As you know, some of them listed there, biomedical, microelectronics, computer, data science, quantum. But again, one of my points of emphasis here is that DoD, Department of Defense, has traditionally been one of the largest funders for cancer research in the world for a number of years. So there are a lot of interest within the Department of Defense, particularly, and other mission agencies that span a broad swath of research. So one of the touch points of why you might want to work with mission agencies is that the mission, that is the kinds of programs and applications that one of these agencies are concerned with, represent interesting problem areas. And again, from my own perspective, I started my professional career working in academia. And I found an application that was in the United States Army that was very interesting to me. So actually, I went and worked for the federal government doing that type of research. So again, the problem space or some of the challenges within a particular mission may represent, you know, a very interesting intellectual challenge. So next slide. If you are thinking about again, wondering if, hey, you know, is there really something for me in these mission agencies? Then here are some points that you should consider. Again, most of what when we talk about mission agencies, we're thinking about more applied research, more translational research. But mission agencies do run the spectrum from fundamental hypothesis-driven research up to clinical and translational research. So there's You may not be able to fund all of your research through one of these mission agencies, but there may be something in the progression of the maturation of what you're doing that fits a mission agency. The other important thing is that more than likely, a mission agency isn't just going to throw you a pot of money, let you go do your thing, and then you'll report back to them at the end. It's a very collaborative process. So not only will you collaborate with the government, but you may be asked to collaborate with other universities or even industry partners as well, as part of the projects that you might work on. The other thing is that and a good approach to getting funding from mission agencies is they're not only looking for the technologies, and by technologies here, I mean the specific areas or topics of research that you're interested in, but they're also looking for capabilities. So a good example of this is Deepak Mishra, who runs the Small Satellite Research Lab here at University of Georgia. So he has very specific research topics that he's interested in, but because of his capabilities running, being able to do small satellite research and some of the sensing technologies that go along with that, he's been able to be funded by some of these mission agencies simply for that capability. So he's been able to fund his lab, fund graduate students, because he has that capability within the Small Satellite Research Lab. And again, some of that funding helps him address some of the specific research topics that he's into. So what my sort of bold point here is that mission agencies are program driven. So again, one of the distinctions between mission-based agencies and some other agencies like NSF or maybe even foundations or industry is that the mission-based agencies have to sort of lay out a series of technology steps in order to get to a product at the end. So there's always, in mission-based agencies, there's always a product at the end. And what they're trying to do is feed the research behind the development of that product. So all of their funding is based around these programs, and every program, again, has a product at the end. So if you believe that your research can fit in that progression up to the end product, then they are more likely to fund you. And we'll talk a little bit about how we understand those programs and how you can sort of integrate your research within those programs. So next slide. Yeah. So as Larry sort of mentioned at the beginning, and we've heard some breadcrumbs drop throughout some of the other talks today, the ability to get sort of consistent and persistent funding from mission agencies is really a long game. And even maybe getting started with funding from these mission agencies is a long game. So in my session, my workshop on March 3rd, we're going to kind of go through some of these bulleted points here. These points basically represent what you need to do in order to start getting funding and, again, start that engagement process. So we'll talk about how you learn what the agency's mission is and what their programs are, how far along their programs, how the programs are influenced, learning their mission. We'll talk about how to engage people within the mission agencies. Again, making those connections, as Larry said, it's all personal, right? So making those connections and sort of selling yourself and selling your ideas to those individuals is important. So we'll talk about how to start that process. The other thing we'll talk about is who are the people that you should be talking to. So it's not necessarily talking to the people with the money or even people with the sort of technical expertise, but it's also, again, the stuff's mission driven, is talking to those end users, understanding how the people in the field will use your ideas down the road or use the products that your research will contribute to. And then we'll sort of wrap up or also discuss other types of mechanisms for engagements with mission agencies. Fellowships for you, fellowships and scholarships for students. How do you, engage your students with them, and how can you leverage those student engagements in these mission agencies to help you understand the agencies better, but also help you be more successful in your pursuit of of funding. Now, I use funding as it's sort of my last word there. The important thing to realize with mission agencies, again, it's a long game, so it's not always about the money. It's about establishing those relationships, becoming a trusted partner so that the funding will fall, later on. Okay, so with that, again, we hope well, first I'd like to answer any questions people may have today, but again, I also look forward to discussing these issues more on March 3rd. Thank you, Larry.
Great. Thanks very much, Marty. So again, trusted relationships, as Marty was mentioning, I think has been echoed throughout. And I think we're structuring these workshops in the way that they're going to be organized by each of the leaders here that you heard from to really help to facilitate development of those trusted relationships. So again, here's a summary of the upcoming workshops. The 27th, February 3rd, 17th, and March 3rd. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. Thank you all, and hope we see you at the workshops. And again, we've structured these in a way so that this is kind of the common overarching session, right? More of us talking, right? The workshops are going to be more interactive, as well as providing some feedback from faculty who've been successful in these particular areas as well. And an opportunity for you to engage further. We just wanted to give you a sense of what we're planning and also how these are all related. So if you can't make all of them, that's fine. If you have specific ones which you think, okay, these are the areas that I'd like to target and learn more about, you can pick and choose which fit best for you. And with that, I'd throw it open to any questions we might have.
Great. Thanks, Larry. And yes, folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function or the raise hand function. I'm going to go ahead and read one question that we've got coming in here. How do you handle it when you have a relationship with a program officer in a particular agency and then that person leaves and someone else comes in and, what do you do to continue that relationship with that agency?
Well, I'll take a first crack at that because I actually served as a rotator at NSF, so I did the leaving thing, right? So I created relationships and then I bugged out, right? I tell you, you can't avoid it, okay? But what you have to do is you have to be aware of the status of the person. Every time I talk to somebody who's, for example, dealing with a agency that has rotators, and I think almost all of them do. NSF, especially NIH, is try to ascertain early on, is the person a rotator or not? That doesn't mean ignore them if they're a rotator, okay? But it means be cognizant of that and be aware that there's a limited time frame. The good thing about that is they, usually it's anywhere from 2 years. It could be as much as 4 years. They're a rotator. They're trying to make an impact. They're trying to shape the program. And so it really makes it even more important that you understand what their goals are. And as I think, Jake, you were mentioning, the solicitation, they may have impact on the solicitation. You can determine maybe what that impact is. But I tell you, the best way to do that is to sit down virtually or otherwise and talk with them. And that even goes for NSF. People are surprised to hear that, okay? But because it's the community that's a panel that's looking at what you're doing and so on and making the assessment. But there is latitude in shaping the programs and other things that the program director does have, even at NSF, and more of the basic research programs and agencies. So hope that helps somewhat.
So I'll jump in as well if we have time. And just to reiterate one of the last points I made in my presentation, it's understanding everyone involved with the research topic. So yes, you will have a program manager, but there will also be other scientists within that lab or that mission agency, as well as the end user. So again, you want to make sure that you are connecting across the spectrum of the enterprise, and not just targeting that one person who's making the funding decisions.
Yeah, I'd say very similar with corporate funding. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when. And your best approach to that is preparing for it in advance, getting to know your point of contact's colleagues in that specific area of research, but also getting to know where else on the University of Georgia campus that company might be involved, and getting to know those people on campus, your colleagues on campus, maybe in other departments, maybe in other units who are working with that company, so that when that time comes, your point of contact moves on, you've got a plan in place to help you reestablish or replace your point of contact.
Great. Thanks, y'all. Another question that's come in. What resources exist to help identify foundations or companies or other funders that make sense for my research program and for me to try to develop relationships with?
Since you said foundations first, I can jump in there. I mean, there is a resource, an online database called Foundation Directory Online. Our access to it on campus is pretty limited, mostly through my office. And I would actually say the best way to help identify potential foundations is to work with my office. And I say that simply because we may have an idea of the landscape, but also because, unfortunately, once people find a foundation they think is a good one, the next step is potentially they just fire off an email or write a letter or send in a letter of intent or something like that, right? And that's really not what we want. We want to kind of get our bearings and map out a best approach to these foundations. So working with us is one good way. The other thing I tell faculty a lot of times is leverage your connections in other institutions. And when you go to conferences, those are good opportunities to get a feel for who's funding in this area. And sometimes even representatives from those funders will be at a conference you attend, or someone who knows someone at that foundation. And again, with the theme of relationships, those personal and professional connections can help us find some inroads and figure out who might be a good funder in this space.
Yeah, as well as your senior colleagues within your unit or department are invaluable resources, especially in terms of what's available in more specialized areas. Although you do need to be a little careful with people who have been around for a really long time, because they may have ideas that are no longer current. So you always want to cross-check those with somebody with a clear, broad understanding of the current funding situation at a funder. The other resource we have besides the Foundation Directory is Pivot. And you can just Google UGA Pivot and it'll take you to the UGA Libraries page where you can register for Pivot. Pivot is a grants database that basically scrapes the web for opportunities offered by foundations and federal government, and to some extent other units like state and local governments. And it is a pretty robust way to search for funding, and offers features like the ability to create a search and then have it just automatically run that search once a week, and it'll send you results. So it'll update you on what's become available without you having to constantly be initiating that search. And so that's highly recommended. You can also create a profile on that allows colleagues to find you as a collaborator for projects that they're working on, and vice versa. So if you're not already registered in that, I highly recommend it. I think that you have to be on campus to initially register for it, but then you can access it from anywhere after that point. And the libraries are happy to provide one-on-one and larger trainings, or they're there to answer your questions about how to use that database.
And when it comes to industry funding, the Office of Business Engagement is here to help for sure. But you can help us help you by thinking, who's hiring your graduates? What companies are hiring your graduates? What industries might have problems that your research could help address? There are, as Matt indicated for foundations and Jake indicated for federal funding, government funding, there are databases that can search by industry, databases that can search by corporate name. D&B Hoovers, Dun & Bradstreet Hoovers is an example, and there is access to that database through the UGA library. Who's funding similar research on other campuses, other universities? And that's just a kind of skimming across the surface. We'll go into a lot more detail on that specific topic on January 27th. Oh, and I would encourage you before that session or before coming to the Office of Business Engagement with that question, be thinking about companies and industries and problems that they might be facing that your research could help solve.
Great. Thanks again to all of you. Do we have any more questions coming in today? A little bit of a shy group on Friday. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, let me thank all of our panelists as well as all of our attendees for being with us today. Again, if you need to refer back to it, we're going to post the video recording to this series, to this event and the rest of the series on the Research Live website, and that should be up hopefully by the end of next week. So as you've heard a few times today, the next event in the series will be 2 weeks from today, January 27th, and will be dedicated to the business of research, building industry relationships that pay. I also want to make sure that everyone knows this 5-part series on funding relationships represents only about half of the Research Live events scheduled for the spring. So again, just go to the Research Live website and you can see everything we've got in store. And I expect there's going to be a few more added to that list as we get closer to May. So thanks again for being with us today. Until next time, and on behalf of the Office of Research, we hope to see you again soon, and have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye-bye.